How's it going? So we are Trive, and we kill fake news. This is me. Let me step over to the side here. I was born in Kiev, raised here in New York City and Washington Heights. I've been coding since I was 13, and I've been in the .com world since '94. I was employee number 5 at Bigfoot, which is one of the first email providers in the world. I was CTR at Big Star at age 30 with a team of 20 and a budget of $3.5 million with no degrees. Afterwards, I went back to school. I got my bachelor's from Empire State College at SUNY, and I got my MBA from Columbia. And my first CEO role was a social network called One Model Place. It was the second largest modeling network on the planet. We had 300,000 models and 100,000 photographers in the system, and it was really, really cool. I've been in the Bitcoin world since 2011. I've been mining since 2013. I've written for Bitcoin Magazine. And my wife and I here were the first couple to get married on the blockchain. Woo! This is Pravda. So I was born in the USSR, and Pravda was mandatory reading. This was the communications channel of the government, and you had to read it. And do you know what Pravda means in Russian? Truth. It wasn't. Fake news is a serious problem in today's world. It affects all age groups and garners more attention than mainstream media. So if you look down here, and I was kind of hard to see, but fake news actually got 8.7 million views, whereas the mainstream news got 7.3 million. The fake news is winning, right? So that's interesting. And the level of confusion spans all age groups, all demographics. This is a serious problem for us. It's the third most concerned issue in the United States. So internet users, fake news is the third most important, behind security and cybercrime. And so where do they get their fake news from? Facebook, internet news sites, Twitter, and Saturday Night Live. There are people who believe that Saturday Night Live is actual news. 84% of us are confused. We just don't know what is and isn't real. And who's responsible? The person reading the news. Social media sites, the government. That scares the hell out of me. If the government can determine what is and isn't news, we have a problem. So think of this, right? So the majority of Trump and Clinton supporters think that fact-checking is the media's responsibility, but they don't trust them. Only 13% of Republicans trust media. Only 50% of Democrats trust media. Less people trust mainstream media than trust Donald Trump. So where do we get our news now? Well, we get it from social, and we get it from our friends. But here's the thing. From a social's point of view, truth is not important. Your views are important. The engagement is important. Monetizing you is important. How they get there, they don't care. We care. So I want to read you this quote. This is a great quote, and I'm going to tell you when it was written. There's no such thing in America as an independent press unless it's in our country towns. There's not one of you who dares to express an honest opinion. If you expressed it, you know it would be beforehand, it would never appear in print. The business of a New York journalist is to distort the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify. You know this and I know it. Our time, our talents, our lives, our possibilities are all the property of other men. This was written in 1883, over 150 years ago, and it was spoken by a senior journalist and editor of a New York paper at a closed meeting of journalists. This is industry talking to itself. This problem has been around for a century and a half. Why? Because the incentives are wrong. So, here's something interesting. Before 1987, we used to have a law that said that television companies and media organizations who have a license from the SEC must present controversial issues to the public importance. So must present issues of controversial importance. If an issue is important, it must be presented. And to do it in a manner that was, in the Commission's view, honest, equitable, balanced, and balanced. In 1987, we struck that law. And here's the part that scares me. In 2011, we dropped the history. So people who look at the Federal Register now don't even know this existed. It's been Stalinized, airbrushed. That's very dangerous. It gets worse. In 1996, we passed the Telecommunications Act. It was signed in by Clinton. And what it did is removed local preemption. So your local stations were able to make decisions about who and who could not compete in the local market because they know the local market. This removed it. This allowed the federal government to override them, and that is not a positive. And so what happened after the 1996 Act? Well, in 1983, 90% of American media was owned by 50 companies. Now it's 6, and they have interlocking ownership. 232 media executives control the diet for all of us. That's 1 per San Francisco. And think about that. They control what you see and what you think, or at least what you read. The problem is sensationalism pays. Being in the middle doesn't work. If you be on the right, you can be on the left. It's easy to monetize because people get excited and interested and they spend money, but in the middle, it's kind of lonely. And so what did that give us? Now think about this, right? The media is very upset that Drudge, Matt Drudge, is the second most influential man in politics. How did he get here? He broke the story of Monica Lewinsky. Not Newsweek, not Michael Isikoff, who actually wrote the story. Imagine how pissed Michael is. He wrote the story about Monica Lewinsky. Newsweek spiked it. And notice what it says. The Newsweek suits spiked it. Drudge won. Okay. So here's the thing. This is the Pew Research Center. And they believe that technology and people can solve this problem. They believe that fake news preys on human emotions and psychology, that brains are now wired to process so much information. When you think about how much information we processed in the 1900s, the 1800s, it was a lot smaller than now. We're inundated. But technology can help, and humans have to come together. We are Trive, and we believe that the truth is the truth no matter who speaks it. So what is Trive? Well, we're the solution to the problem. We pay people, we source crowds to do primary research on news stories. Did this thing happen? We pay them with TriveCoin, because nobody works for free. We hash and stash the results on the blockchain, and not just our work, but the underlying data, because if the underlying data is ever changed, we want to know. And we monetize the whole thing via a browser plugin. And the thing is here, the trust itself is changing. The nature of trust is changing. So it used to be that we would have trust in our centralized organizations, government, media, police. We don't anymore. And it's the blockchains. Blockchains will help with trust over time. And so it's interesting. Emily Bell from Columbia's Tow Center says, do we trust those news sources that tell the truth, or do we trust the ones that tell us what we want to hear? And so my answer to that is, you can ignore the consequences of your actions, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring the consequences. At some point, it bites you in the ass, and that's when you want the truth. So how do we fix it? With crowds. And MIT, as well as others, believe that crowds can actually do a better job than individuals. So there was an experiment back in the, I want to say 50s, where they put a jelly bean jar on the table, and they asked people to guess how many jelly beans were in the jar. Each individual was off, sometimes dramatically, 40, 50, 60%. But the average of all those guesses was on point. It was only off by 3%. They replicated the experiment again in 2007, and believe it or not, I was actually part of that experiment. I didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, I remember the experiment. It works. But it doesn't work all the time. It's not that simple. It's never that simple. In some cases, crowds work. In some cases, they're smarter. And what they need is diversity, independence, decentralization, disagreement, and contest. And so you know what that sounds like? That sounds like a blockchain. So what we do in more detail is it's a Nash equilibrium game. There's checks and balances to assure quality. We assign a truth score between 0 and 100. We pay bounties for research, verification, and curation. Everyone in the system is anonymous. We don't know who you are. All we know about you is your Ethereum wallet address and a reputation score. We hash and stash the data. We score accuracy over time. So think of us as Reddit or Stack Overflow, but for news. This is kind of the system in a high level of detail. We'll do that in a second. This is what you see as a browser plugin. So there's the browser plugin in the upper right-hand corner, nice pretty Trive logo. And what happens is the stories get colored, and obviously this is very crude, so it will get better as we go along, but the stories get colored based on their veracity. Stories that are false, that are in red, as you can see, are really dark and hard to see. You can't see them, and chances are you won't click on them, which means media won't monetize that click stream. But stories that are true, that are in green, are highlighted and easy to see, and so you're likely to click on them. And this one here, I want to show you down here, it's empty. What that is the consumer has dialed the dial all the way up, and they've said, when a story is false to a very large degree, I don't even want to see it. Just pull it from the stream, save my attention span. And that's what happens here. So how do we know that it's actually true? That's a great question. We have 4 participants in the system. 5 actually, if you count the consumer. And the 4 are curators, researchers, verifiers, and witnesses. So a curator takes a story from the marketplace and creates what's called a claims sheet. This is what the story claims. Donald Trump was in the White House on January 1st. He said the following things. 7 people were in attendance. Are those things true? Those are 3 claims. Those claims then go to a researcher, and researchers use their own tools, whatever they may be, software, physical visits, other online sources, to determine the veracity of those claims. They attach a score, they attach supporting documentation, and a write-up. And then they send it off to a verifier. A verifier verifies the researcher's work. But if a verifier can prove the researcher is wrong, the verifier can take the researcher's money. And that is 10 times what the verifier gets paid. So there's a strong incentive for verifiers to argue with the researchers. What they do is they create the same thing the researcher created, so there's no way to tell the difference. And they submit it to a pool of witnesses for verification and review. It's a double-blind study. The witnesses don't know which one is research and which is verification. Researchers and verifiers don't know who the witnesses are. And the witnesses judge what is and isn't true. After it's all over, we hash and stash the results on the blockchain, and then you see it here. That's where the scores show up. So we are Trive, and we believe the truth is the truth, no matter who speaks it. Can I answer any questions? Please. That's a great question. It depends on the story. So we've been talking about Donald Trump and Russia for a year. People who have worked that story have their sources already backed up, so their ability to respond is very quick. But a new story that shows up might take some time. And there's a saying that says, the truth is struggling to put its pants on while the lie has gone around the world, right? The truth takes time, unfortunately. Not much we can do about that. Any others?
What if something is true, but the source is confidential and there's no way to verify it?
Then there's no way to verify it. There's nothing we can do about that. But mind you, confidential sources get leaked. I have seen paperwork that is graded above Q in terms of secrecy. It's leaked. So if you can link to it and you can prove that it's real, even though it's leaked, there's a source. And interestingly enough, since we don't control how this verification happens, it's open to whistleblowers, hackers. Snowden could have used this. Assange can use this. We don't control it. Any others? Please. Right, so this browser plugin, right there, the idea is we sell it for $1 a month. Right? And interestingly enough, so for that $1 a month, you actually get some Trive tokens, and you use those tokens to send in stories that have not yet been verified. So you're seeing a story, you read it and you go, that's complete nonsense. I want to verify that. And you send it in and you attach a token. 1,000 other people do the same because they all think so. Now you have 1,000 tokens stacked on that bounty. Now it makes sense for a curator to do her work. She's the only one who can get a profit in the system. So when there's enough of a bounty, she's going to grab it and use it and work with it. Anybody else? Please.
How do you have a sense that you're going to have enough economic incentive in the system for this
Right.
scale to get off the ground and scale and get enough curators?
Sure.
How do you know it's going to match up?
Right, well, we need a lot of people, no question. And we have to try to get mass adoption and get people interested. We think that we have a very strong value proposition, so people will want to do it. But people do it now anyway. You sit on Facebook, you sit on Reddit, and they argue every day. It's bullshit, this is wrong, this is false. We'll pay them for it. And if you think about the people on 4chan, do you know 4chan? Okay, so 4chan, for those of you who don't know, 4chan is a website. It's mostly populated by young guys. It's very emotionally difficult, and they are mostly on the spectrum. And that's not really a negative thing to say, it's just who they are. And so what they are is what we call weaponized autists. So these are guys, yeah, that's an actual term. These are guys who are able to determine the identity of an individual even though he's wearing a mask. This was Berkeley Antifa. They've unmasked Berkeley professors. They were wearing full balaclavas. Nothing but pictures. They called it an airstrike on ISIS using nothing but a video. Oh, look, there's a tower and a tower. The only place on the planet that happens is here. That must be the training base. And they blow it up. We want to pay these guys because they're a national resource. Right now, they're just guys living in their mother's basement doing this for fun. It's non-sustainable. Long term, they're going to be our researchers. Any others? Sorry?
What can they convert the Trive coins to?
Right, well, so it's an ERC20 token. When it's listed on exchanges, and it's not yet, then you can sell it for whatever the exchanges are, Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever, and then convert that to whatever you want. Right, well, at the moment, I mean, it was still very early in the system. We still have to develop that back end. In the long run, it's a token like any others. It's liquid on exchanges, and it's convertible, buyable, sellable. Any other questions? Please.
Just from a regulatory perspective, is this a utility token? Are there going to be any holding periods?
Right. Well, so the staff is a 3-year vest with a 6-month cliff. Advisors are free and clear. And we believe we're a utility token. Our argument is if we're not a utility token, no one is. Our token has 2 uses. 1, the ability to send stories in, and 2, get paid. That's it. Anybody else? All right. Thank you, everybody.